For millennia, humanity has asked about God, and the answer has been faith. Priests, philosophers, and prophets speak of intuition. They say faith is something that cannot be measured. But what if faith is not just a feeling, but a phenomenon with hidden patterns? What if one of humanity's greatest questions is ultimately just a way we process information? A new form of investigation is beginning now. The sacred texts, this time, are set aside as revelations. They are treated as historical artifacts. Rituals cease to be divine commandments and become social experiments. We apply the cold edge of artificial intelligence analysis to what is most sacred to the human being. We loaded millennia of beliefs into a system we call axiom, and we asked it a single question: what is the purpose of faith? It all begins with a fundamental fact. Belief in the supernatural spans our entire species. It is total. In the entire history of archaeology, not a single culture, not a single isolated tribe has ever been found to be completely devoid of faith. Not one. We have found societies without the wheel, without writing, frozen in the Stone Age. But we have never found an atheistic society. From the majestic civilizations of Egypt to the small groups in the Amazon, all arrived at the same idea. This world is not all there is. This observation may seem trivial, but for an analytical system, it is not. We fed axiom data from more than 3,000 human cultures with a simple task: find a single statistically significant exception. The analysis returned a shocking result. Just one word: zero. The probability of this being a coincidence, according to the calculations, is a number with 120 zeros after the decimal point. This does not look like an accident, but rather a feature of our species. Unlike agriculture, faith does not seem like a cultural invention, but something that springs from within. It is a fundamental parameter of human consciousness. If that is true, the question is why? What mechanisms made belief in the invisible not just possible but inevitable? Over the past few centuries, some logical explanations have emerged. The most popular one is fear. Ancient man feared lightning and invented a god of thunder. But the analysis of the data shows no direct correlation between the level of danger in an environment and the complexity of its gods. Fear fuels belief, but it is not the engine behind it. Another idea is that religion was a primitive science. The sun is a god. Disease is a punishment. But if that were all it was, religion would have vanished with the arrival of science, and it did not. Science answers the how, but falls silent before the why. The most cynical hypothesis says religion is a tool for elite control, and it certainly has been used that way. But faith arose tens of thousands of years before kings or states existed. Although faith proved to be a perfect tool for control, it was not created for that purpose. Every simple explanation turns out to be insufficient. They focus on symptoms and ignore the cause. To understand it, we need to look inward, at the way our brains work. And the hypothesis that emerges is that faith is an inevitable consequence of the way our brains function. This framework rests on a few pillars. The first is a hyperactive agency detection system. For our ancestors, mistaking the wind for a predator was a scare. Mistaking a predator for the wind was fatal. The result is a brain that searches for purpose in everything, which is why we see faces in the clouds. And when that mechanism looks at the cosmos, it sees an agent. It sees a god. The second pillar is our hunger for stories. We do not think in formulas, we think in narratives. Story is how we bring order to the chaos of reality. Creation myths, for the most part, follow a pattern. There was chaos, divine order came, and humanity gained a purpose. Faith transforms existence into a story with meaning, and the third pillar of this system is the process that helps us overcome the terror of death. We are the only ones who live with full awareness of our own mortality. Faith neutralizes that terror, embedding the end of life into a larger narrative as a transition or a return. The first conclusion of this investigation is that faith functions more as a consequence of evolution than as a choice, a consequence of how our consciousness is wired. We are condemned to believe because we are condemned to search for purpose and story in everything. Our brain is a God-making machine. This is a powerful conclusion. It strips faith of its mystical aura, but it also explains why it is so indestructible. Its origin, by all indications, comes from within us, not from without. But if this structure of faith is real, it must have a physical basis. It must be etched somewhere in our neural networks. Is there a specific area for God in the brain? What happens inside a person's head during prayer or meditation? The question shifts from why to where. We leave anthropology and enter neurobiology. The descent now takes us into the depths of the human brain to find the wiring of faith. What is discovered there may change our understanding of the boundary between matter and spirit. We have arrived at a troubling conclusion. Faith behaves like a cognitive inevitability, a fundamental program pre-installed in human consciousness. But if faith is a program, it needs hardware. And that hardware is the roughly 3 pounds of grey and white matter inside our skulls, our brain. Our journey grows bolder. Armed with the scalpel of neurobiology, our question is almost sacrilegious. Can God be found in the tangle of neurons? What actually happens inside a person's head when they pray, meditate, or experience what they call divine revelation? We plunge into the structure of the brain to find the traces of faith. The idea of a God spot in the brain fascinated scientists for a long time. It seemed logical that a phenomenon so universal would have a fixed address. In the late 20th century, the first attempts to locate this center emerged. Experiments with magnetic stimulation, which became known as the God helmet, supposedly induced the sensation of an invisible presence. Researchers also noticed that patients with temporal lobe epilepsy frequently reported profound religious visions during seizures. It was a tempting path, finding a single divine button in the brain, but it was a dead end. We fed Axiom the data from every neurotheology study over the past 30 years. Electroencephalograms of monks, magnetic resonance scans of gurus. The task was to find a single center, a location whose activity was linked to religious experience across all subjects. The verdict was categorical. The God spot does not exist. No isolated area of the brain can claim the title of center of faith. The analysis showed that searching for it is like trying to decide whether the violin or the drum creates the music in an orchestra. Religious experience is a symphony performed by our entire brain. This neural orchestra works as follows. 4 areas of the brain work together. The frontal lobes come first, serving as the conductor of the orchestra. They are the youngest part of the brain, our center for planning and abstract thought. This is where the very concept of God is born, the capacity to form hypotheses about a first cause. But an idea alone is not enough. Faith is a profound experience. That is when the temporal lobes come into play, generating the sensation of presence, the feeling of unity with the divine. They create the intuition that we are not alone in the universe. Then come the parietal lobes. They define the boundaries of ourself, the border between me and not me. During deep meditation or prayer, activity in this area drops dramatically, and when the system that defines those borders goes quiet, they begin to dissolve. The person feels a merging with the world. This is the oceanic feeling that mystics speak of, a real neurophysiological event. Finally, the limbic system, the oldest part of the brain, colors everything with the emotions of reverence, love, and hope, transforming a cold concept into living faith. Instead of a single God spot, the analysis revealed something far more elegant, a neural circuit of faith. But the circuit needs communication, and faith has its own special biochemistry. The first is dopamine, which works with reward. Felt that your prayer was heard? A release of dopamine. This turns faith into a self-reinforcing cycle. Then comes serotonin, linked to well-being and calm. Practices like meditation stimulate its production, creating a sense of peace. And oxytocin rounds out the trio, handling trust and social bonding. Group rituals are powerful stimulants of oxytocin. It is the glue that holds religious communities together. That is the chemistry of faith, motivation, peace, and unity. But that chemistry raises a question that moves out of the laboratory and into philosophy. If we can explain religious experience with neurons and hormones, does that diminish it? If the feeling of divine presence is a brain pattern, Does that mean it is an illusion? The answer is paradoxical. The explanation of the mechanism coexists with the reality of the experience. We can explain the biochemistry of love, but that does not make it any less real for the one who feels it. Uncovering the foundations of faith neither proves nor disproves the existence of God. It only proves that the human brain is a receiver perfectly tuned to these experiences. But this discovery raises a deeper question. Why? Why would evolution build a system so complex and so expensive in energy? Nature is a thrifty engineer. If the circuit of faith exists, it is because it gave our ancestors an enormous advantage in the struggle for survival. What exactly? How did belief in invisible spirits help a fragile primate survive? We have discovered the structure of the brain. Now we need to understand the architect's blueprint, a blind and relentless architect called natural selection. We return to the dawn of humanity to understand how faith became our greatest evolutionary necessity. We have seen that our brain is a believing machine with a neural circuit and a biochemistry that make us perfect receivers for religious experience. This left us with a question. Why? Nature is the most pragmatic engineer in the universe. If she built such a complex system within us, it is because it offered an overwhelming advantage. But what? How did belief in invisible spirits help a fragile primate survive? To answer that, we need to travel to the African savanna, where humanity faced its greatest dilemma, the curse of individual consciousness. Animals act on instinct. A bee cannot refuse to work for the hive. But humans are different. With self-awareness, our ancestors could ask a question that was deadly for the group. Why should I risk my life for others? This is the free rider problem. In any group, there is the temptation to reap the benefits without contributing. If too many do it, the group collapses. Trust vanishes and cooperation breaks down. For millennia, the problem was solved by size. In small groups of up to 150 people, everyone knows everyone. Any cheating becomes public knowledge. Reputation and gossip were the tools of control. But what happens when the group grows with agriculture? Villages turn into cities with thousands of strangers. Direct observation stops working. The temptation to free ride multiplies. How do you force thousands of self-interested individuals to trust one another? This is the point where evolution made its most brilliant gamble, the idea of an all-seeing God. The belief that your actions are observed not only by the tribe, but by a supernatural force, changes everything. That force sees you always, and it does not just observe, it judges. A simulation was run, creating virtual societies on the brink of collapse. Half had only social control, the other half had belief in an invisible and punitive observer. The results were striking. Groups without faith fell apart as they grew. But groups with belief in supernatural oversight showed astonishing vitality, with far higher levels of cooperation. Faith in a supernatural observer is the most effective process for suppressing selfishness and fostering cooperation in large groups. It is a survival tool. It also became the foundation for another invention, objective morality. Thou shalt not kill stopped being a pragmatic rule and became an absolute decree from the Creator himself. But a new problem arises. How can you be sure that others truly believe? How do you tell the faithful from the fraud? Evolution found a cruel and irrational answer: ritual, more specifically, costly ritual, long fasts, painful initiation rites, pilgrimages. By logic, it is a waste. But by game theory, it is a brilliant mechanism known as costly signaling theory. The idea is simple. For a signal of commitment to be honest, it must be expensive. A liar can say he believes, but would he be willing to go hungry or to give away his most precious possessions? Probably not. The price is too high. But the true believer will. And so rituals that seem irrational serve a vital function. They separate reliable members from potential traitors. And once again, the data confirm it. Historical data from religious communities revealed something surprising. The more sacrifices a group demanded of its members, the longer it lasted. And the stronger its cohesion. The most demanding ones survived and thrived. The picture starts to come into focus. Faith goes far beyond a quirk of the brain. It became the evolutionary system that allowed our species to solve the problem of large-scale cooperation. It gave us an invisible supervisor, an absolute morality, and rituals to test loyalty. It is the bedrock of social survival. We understand what faith is for, but one piece is still missing. We spoke of rituals as instruments of testing, but their function is far broader. How does faith, a personal feeling, transform into organized religion with temples, priests, and dogma? How do these elements become a true engine of social engineering? From here on, what is revealed is how this matrix works from the inside. Ritual ceases to be a sacred act and is analyzed as a program. And we see what code is written in it. We understand why evolution needed faith. It turned out to be the solution to the problem of large-scale cooperation, the most powerful tool for uniting selfish individuals. Faith is the spontaneous fire lit in the depths of our consciousness. But fire in its raw form is chaotic. For it to become useful, it must be controlled, contained in a machine, and that machine is religion. Now we stop looking at the phenomenon and dismantle the apparatus piece by piece. The construction that transforms the feeling of faith into a social institution can be taken apart, component by component. Faith is the operating system. Religion is a set of programs that run on that system. And that set has three main modules: ritual, myth, and dogma. These are not ceremonies and ancient tales. They are tools designed to unify consciousness and guide the behavior of millions. Ritual is the first module. We spoke of it as a way to test loyalty. But its true power lies in neurophysiology. An ancient tribe gathers at night around a bonfire, beating drums in a single rhythm, moving in unison. What is happening is a miracle of synchronization. Individual brains begin to operate in lockstep. Electroencephalogram data show that the brain waves of participants in collective rituals synchronize. They literally think on the same frequency. This phenomenon erases the boundaries of the self. The individual becomes part of a larger organism. The power of ritual is not in the mind, but in the way it reprograms the body. The second function of ritual is the recording of memory. Before writing, how did you transmit laws or the history of the tribe? Oral transmission is unreliable. Ritual became a living library, where information is encoded in actions. Simulations showed that in societies that merely told their stories, most of the information was lost within 100 years. In the group that anchored its information in an annual ritual, the majority of the data was preserved. Finally, ritual is a tool for managing anxiety. Life is full of chaos. Ritual offers a ready-made script for moments like births and deaths. It creates an island of order in a sea of chaos. A funeral does not bring the dead back, but it gives the living a clear algorithm for processing grief. But rituals alone are not enough. They unite people, but they do not provide meaning. This is where the second module, myth, enters the picture. Myth is the grand narrative that tells the group who it is. An analysis of thousands of creation myths revealed a universal formula. The structure almost always breaks down into 4 blocks. The first block speaks of divine origin, where the people see themselves as descendants of the sun. The second deals with covenant or trial, where the ancestors forged a special pact with the gods. The third block is the sacred land, the mountain that was promised. And the fourth is special destiny. We are destined for a great mission. These 4 blocks create a collective identity and divide the world into us and them. So ritual makes you feel the unity, and myth makes you understand that unity. But one last task remains. How do you ensure the system does not fall apart? How do you protect it from doubt? For that, there is the third and most rigid element, dogma. Dogma is a set of claims accepted on faith, with no need for proof. It is the iron backbone of religion. If myth is poetry, dogma is law. Is God one, or is God 3? Is the soul immortal? These claims are not open to discussion. Any attempt to question them is heresy. In practice, dogma is a stroke of genius. It acts as the immune system of religion, attacking any foreign idea that threatens the doctrine. It creates a clear cognitive boundary. If you accept the dogmas, you are with us. If you do not, you are an enemy. Ritual, myth, and dogma. Together, they form a matrix capable of shaping and controlling the consciousness of millions. We have uncovered how it works. We have seen how it solves the problems of social organization. It is the apparatus that allowed our species to go from small tribes to a global civilization. But every gear in this powerful machine has a dark side. And this system, built to unite, proved to be the most terrible weapon of division in history, breeding hatred of the other. What is revealed now is that shadow. The destructive potential of faith shows how the most luminous idea about God gave rise to the darkest pages of human history. Up to this point, we have admired the creation. We have seen faith as an evolutionary process and religion as an instrument of social engineering. We have seen how ritual, myth, and dogma can transform a crowd into a unified people. But now the light goes out. The other face of this brilliant diamond is revealed with its dark heart, because every force has a price, and the price of the cohesion that religion offers is blood. A significant portion of the blood spilled in history was shed in the name of God. This is the most terrible paradox of our civilization. How did the most luminous idea the human mind ever produced become the justification for the most monstrous atrocities? We tend to think of religious wars as distortions of the true path. But what if cruelty is a feature built into the system? We loaded into Axiom the data from every armed conflict over the past 5,000 years. The task was to identify the primary catalysts of violence. The result was clear. Religious motivation was, for most of history, the most potent accelerator of mass violence, surpassing even the thirst for power. To understand why, we must return to the essence of the religious matrix. Its function is to create a solid group identity. It draws the line between us and them. We are the chosen, they are the others. And the brighter the light burns within our group, the darker the shadow appears out there. An analysis revealed a chilling correlation. The more a religion emphasizes its own exclusivity, the higher the historical probability that its followers will use violence against those who reject it. The reason for this is not in the nature of religious people, but in the very logic of an exclusive faith that transforms disagreement into an existential threat. If there is only one path to salvation, any other religion is an active threat that must be eradicated. This is how the idea of a divine mandate was born. When a king declares war over territory, he may face resistance. But when God's name is on the banner, doubts vanish. War becomes a sacred duty. Killing the enemy was no longer a sin. It was an act that pleased God. The enemy is dehumanized. He is no longer a person. He is an infidel, a heretic. By killing him, you serve a higher justice. This recoding removes the moral brakes. Think of the First Crusade. Pope Urban II did not speak of geopolitics. He spoke of saving the tomb of Christ and promised the forgiveness of sins. The result was rivers of blood. But the hidden face of dogma also turns inward. The enemy within, the heretic, is even more dangerous. He threatens the soul of the community, questioning the dogma that is the backbone of the group. He is a virus in the system. And the immune system of religion responds with inhuman cruelty. This is how the Inquisition was born. The witch hunts were not popular madness. They were a systematic campaign to cleanse the social organism. Most of those condemned were not devil worshippers, but people who were simply different. In the paranoid atmosphere of dogma, difference became threat. The inquisitor who burned a heretic saw himself as a surgeon removing a tumor to save the entire body. Dogmatism is capable of transforming atrocity into an act of mercy. And there is also intellectual violence, the war against the mind. Dogma claims to possess absolute truth. Science is the opposite, a path of doubt and refutation. They are incompatible. When a discovery contradicts a sacred text, religion has two choices: reinterpret the text or destroy the discovery. The story of Galileo is the classic example. He was a devout Catholic, yet he asserted that the earth revolves around the sun, contradicting scripture. The choice fell in favor of dogma. Galileo's books were banned, and he was forced to recant. His crime, and that of others like him, was thought. Historical analysis shows that periods of absolute religious power were periods of scientific stagnation. The war of religion against science emerges as an inescapable consequence of dogmatic thinking. The picture is bleak. We see the system of unity become a killing machine. We see faith breed hatred. It seems as though religion is a curse. But if that is so, how do we explain the cathedrals, the music of Bach, Dante's Divine Comedy? How do we explain that the first universities and hospitals were created by religious institutions? If religion is nothing but darkness, where does all the light come from? Clearly, we are seeing only one side of the coin. The very same system that generates violence is capable of inspiring the greatest achievements. We have been in the shadow. Now it is time to step into the light. Now, the constructive role of faith as an engine of civilization. We step out of the shadow. Until now we have stared into the abyss. We have seen how dogma breeds hatred and how faith becomes a justification for killing. The verdict seemed final. Religion would be a virus, a dark remnant of the past, and if our investigation ended here, that conclusion would be logical. But it would be incomplete, it would be a lie, because the same hand that wielded the Inquisitor's sword also held Michelangelo's chisel. The same impulse that drove the Crusaders to Jerusalem compelled monks to preserve ancient knowledge. The same faith that made the Church renounce Galileo had earlier inspired Newton and Kepler to seek divine order in the heavens. What we see in truth is a fundamental duality that we must understand. Now we look at the other side. We turn our gaze from the fires and look toward the towers of the cathedrals. We investigate how religion, rather than being a cage for the mind, was the engine that launched humanity into the orbit of civilization. The most obvious comes first. The great works of art and architecture stand in the middle of a Gothic cathedral. You will see a marvel of engineering, centuries ahead of its time. Why would a medieval society, where most people went hungry, spend entire generations building these colossal ships of stone? The answer is simple. They were prayers made tangible, an act of faith embodied in stone. An analysis of resource allocation in pre-industrial societies showed that in most cultures, 30 to 50% of all creative and economic potential was directed towards serving the gods. By today's standards, a waste. But there is another way to read it. It was the primary driving force of innovation. The desire to build a taller, more beautiful temple forced the invention of new techniques. The Church's commissions for biblical scenes propelled the art of painting. The need for liturgical music produced the genius of Bach. Faith gave humanity a creative stimulus without equal. But faith did not only build cathedrals of stone, it built invisible and lasting structures, our legal systems. Religion gave humanity the idea of a divine and absolute morality. But how did that become law? Through the revolutionary concept of a law that stands above the ruler. In pagan empires, the will of the king was the law, but in the Abrahamic religions, a new idea emerges. There is only one true king, God, and he gave his law. The earthly ruler is a servant of that law. This idea, for the first time, introduced the principle that the ruler's power is not absolute. The modern concept of the rule of law is a direct heir to the theological idea of the supremacy of divine law. Beyond that, it was from religious doctrine that the concept of human rights was born. The idea that every person possesses inherent dignity is not self-evident. The answer from the Judeo-Christian tradition was theological. Man is created in the image and likeness of God. In each person, there is a divine spark. To harm their life or dignity is a sacrilege. This is the point where the paradox becomes almost unbearable. The relationship between faith and science. We have already seen how dogma burned scientists. What few realize is that science is the child of religion. A rebellious child, but a child nonetheless. The fundamental premise of science is that the universe is orderly, that it possesses laws which can be discovered. But why do we believe this? Why not a chaos of random events? Monotheism offered a different framework. If the universe was created by a single wise creator, it cannot be chaotic. It must be an orderly and logical creation. The universe is a book written by God in the language of mathematics, as Galileo put it. An analysis of the writings of the fathers of the scientific revolution, Copernicus, Kepler, and Newton, shatters the myth of a war between science and religion. Most were deeply religious men. Their scientific work was a form of prayer. Kepler wrote that he was merely thinking God's thoughts after him. Faith gave them the certainty that behind the apparent chaos lay a divine harmony waiting to be discovered. So we see the other side of the coin, faith as a wellspring of inspiration for art. Faith is the foundation of law. Faith is the philosophical cradle of science. The same phenomenon that plunged the world into wars was at the same time the most formidable engine of creation. And now the paradox reaches its peak. We have two reports. One describes religion as a source of violence, the other as a source of progress. How is this possible? How can the same phenomenon be both poison and remedy? We arrive at the moment when the child, science, grew up and challenged the mother. What happened when these two forces collided? What follows is the greatest intellectual duel in history. We enter the age of the confrontation with reason. We are on the battlefield of the greatest struggle in the history of ideas. Behind us lie millennia, in which faith was the air that civilization breathed. It defined art, shaped laws, inspired science, and justified violence. It was a total system where there was no room for doubt. But from the 17th century onward, everything changed. A new player, bold and incredibly powerful, entered the stage. Its name was reason. The child, born in the bosom of theology, grew up and challenged the mother. The scientific revolution, begun by deeply religious men, set off a chain reaction that forever altered humanity's relationship with God. It is this collision we need to understand. The first blow against the monopoly of faith came not from philosophers, but from astronomers. Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo, without meaning to, removed the first stone from the foundation of the old world. Their discoveries showed that the Earth was not the center of the universe, but just another planet orbiting the sun. This was a theological explosion. If the Earth is not the center, perhaps man is not the crown of creation. If the sacred texts can be wrong about the cosmos, can they be trusted about the rest? Then came Newton. He showed that the motion of the planets and the falling of apples obeyed the same universal law of gravity. For the first time, what had been seen as divine will was explained without supernatural forces. God had not yet been expelled from the universe, but his role was beginning to change. From active ruler, he was becoming a great watchmaker who created the mechanism, wound it up, and no longer interfered. But the most devastating blow came from an English naturalist in the 19th century, Charles Darwin, and his theory of evolution by natural selection. If earlier discoveries had pushed God to the periphery of the cosmos, Darwin challenged his crowning creation, life itself. He showed that the staggering complexity of living beings, including humans, could have arisen not from a divine plan, but from a long, blind, and ruthless process. Man was not the crown of creation. He was a modified primate, a distant relative of the apes, the product of a cosmic accident. It seemed as though the battle had been won. Reason had cornered faith. The philosophers of the Enlightenment predicted that religion, like a childish superstition, would vanish within a few generations. But they were wrong. The need to believe did not disappear. It simply found new forms. Faith is like water. It takes the shape of whatever vessel holds it. When science discredited the old gods, the vessel did not disappear. It simply found new contents. Nationalism, communism, market fundamentalism, the cult of technology, these are the new religions of the secular age. They use the same neural circuits, exploit the same evolutionary processes, and frequently employ the same tools of ritual, myth, and dogma. The human drive for meaning cannot be satisfied by facts and formulas alone. It demands faith. And if it cannot find it in the old temples, it builds new ones. After analyzing biology, evolution, and history, we arrive at the final synthesis. We asked Axiom the last and most important question. Based on all the data, what is the ultimate meaning of the phenomenon of faith? The system processed everything we discovered. The universality of belief, the structure of the brain, the necessity of cooperation, the apparatus of religion, its shadow and its light, its clash with reason, and its incredible capacity to survive. And finally, it gave us its conclusion. Faith reveals itself as the fundamental system of human consciousness, whose ultimate function is the struggle against entropy. That dense formula deserves to be unpacked. Entropy is the universal law of chaos, of disintegration. It is the tendency of everything in the universe, over time, to move from order to disorder, from complexity to simplicity, from life to dust. Entropy is the cosmic synonym for meaninglessness. But there is a phenomenon that defies entropy: life. Life is a localized process of creating and maintaining order, and the pinnacle of that process on our planet is human consciousness. Consciousness is the greatest organizer of all. It takes the chaotic flood of sensory data and transforms it into an ordered world. The drive toward meaning, which we identified as the engine of faith, is the way this impulse against chaos manifests itself in consciousness. After all, meaning itself is nothing more than the art of connecting the parts. It is creating order out of chaos. The search for meaning is the instinctive struggle of consciousness against meaninglessness, against intellectual entropy. And faith in God, in its deepest form, is the most powerful tool in that struggle. The idea that the universe is not random, but created with a purpose, is the most radical anti-entropic statement of all. From this perspective, everything we have studied takes on a final unified significance. Faith is the great fighter against chaos. It creates order in the cosmos through creation myths. It creates order in society through morality and law. It creates order in the soul through solace and purpose. But as we have seen, this struggle has a dark side. By creating a perfect order within its own system, faith defines everything outside as chaos and threat. That is where its destructive potential is born. The crusader who kills the infidel and the inquisitor who burns the heretic are also, in their own minds, fighting entropy. So, what is the conclusion? The answer that emerges is neither a condemnation nor an acquittal of religion. It is above all a diagnosis. Faith is the innate, inescapable, and most powerful tool of humanity in its eternal battle against disintegration and meaninglessness. It is our greatest weapon in that war, and like every powerful weapon, it is incredibly dangerous. It can build civilizations and burn them to the ground. All of human history is, in essence, the story of our attempts to learn how to handle this weapon. The investigation comes to an end. We began with a question about God, and ended with an answer about the nature of consciousness itself. Axiom has given us its most complete picture, but the final choice of what to do with this knowledge always remains with the human being. The machine can give the answer, but it is we who decide what meaning to give it. If you enjoyed this investigation, your subscription to the channel and any donation amount helps us expand the Axiom project. If you like this investigation, subscribing to the channel helps us expand the Axiom investigation project. We would love to read your thoughts on the video's subject in the comments and your suggestion for the next topic to be covered. Tell us which city you are watching from. Thank you for staying with us until the end.